So, a little bit different today. I'm Jay. Welcome to What It's Like. Behind the scenes episode. Make a video real quick and show you guys what goes into making each one of these videos. Because I've gotten so many questions, I figured it would just be easier to make a video about it. Should start with shooting style. I shoot these cars different than just about anybody else that does car reviews. A lot of people will just do one car a day. They will spend their whole entire day with one car. I don't do it that way. I find a place that has 10, 15, 20 cars that I'm interested in doing. And then I'll just go and spend the whole day at that location and shoot as many cars as I possibly can. The record is I've shot 30 cars in one day before. 15 20 minutes per car, that's all I really need to show the glove box test, to show all of the different angles and everything else.
Just coming in here real quick to clarify a couple things. I'm not against doing one or two cars per location. I try to do things this way because it just works out better. I can go and shoot one day versus shoot the whole month and do other things in the background. We also try to do 5 videos a week. It takes 5 to 8 hours of research, comparisons, ads, specs, editing to do each episode. So doing 20 cars in one day gives you enough content for the whole month. And honestly, that's how I'm able to put out as much content as I put out, because I only go and shoot one time. Classic Auto Mall, for those that don't know, I'm from Western Pennsylvania. Here's a map of Pennsylvania. I am here. Classic Auto Mall is clear over here. So it takes me 5 hours to drive out to Classic Auto Mall and 5 hours back. That is a really long day for me. A lot of people don't know. That's a 23-hour day for me. I leave here at 4 o'clock in the morning and generally won't get home until 3 o'clock or even 4 o'clock the very next day, making it a 23 or 24-hour day. Also, sometimes there's cars from the previous month that I can take from the pile, so to speak. I can just take cars from the pile. There's generally between either 20 to 30, maybe even 50 cars in the pipeline, depending on what was shot, depending on how many episodes we did that month, etc.
There are times where I do get to drive the cars, and that's a question that comes up a lot. Why don't I drive the cars? It's more or less of an insurance reason. Last year I worked at John Kuefleitner's out in Salem, Ohio, and I can tell you that you can have 2 cars that look identical. They are identical in every single way. Year, engine options, transmission options. They will not drive the same because everything ages differently. Like one car, the steering box could be totally worn out, and the other one, all the bushings and stuff could be worn out, and they just drive different. So that's one. And the other reason is insurance costs. I'm not like Doug DeMuro. I don't make a ton of money. I can't afford to pay $20,000 a year to have an insurance policy big enough on me to drive cars like that. And some cars, like the Cadillac V16, I was allowed to drive that car if I wanted to, but there's some cars that even if I was allowed to drive, I wouldn't, because it's different. If something happens to a car that is, I don't know, say 70, 80 years old, versus if something happens to a car that's built now, something that's built now is totally replaceable. Something that was built 70, 80 years ago isn't replaceable. And that scares the bejeezers out of me, is I don't want to be the guy that ruined a part of history. So a lot of times I don't drive the cars because, frankly, I don't really want to drive really expensive high-end cars that are not replaceable. And like I said, they all drive different. So my experience might be different than your experience. So what's in the legendary bag? Let's take a look. So this bag houses all of the stuff that I need to shoot the cars. I use the GoPro a lot, so that's what I usually use. All the walk around shots, All the slow motion shots, most everything is shot with this GoPro. And it's not a new one. It's a Hero 9. I'm thinking about upgrading because I've been having a lot of issues with this. This is the legendary camera that I used for the glove box test. This is the original lens. Well, this is a Sigma 18-35 1.8 lens. This lens is epic. The only thing with it is it doesn't have image stabilization, so a lot of those early shots were super shaky. This lens gives a lot of bokeh, or it's almost like a vignette around the edges. It darkens out the edges. It makes it look really good and cinematic. But I've since got a different lens. This lens here is the lens that I generally put on to shoot all the shots now because it has image stabilization. It zooms a whole lot further than... So, I mean, it doesn't look like it zooms that much, but it does. This zoom is all internal, so it doesn't get any bigger on the outside. I also have this 40mm pancake lens. It's a 2.8, but it's nice because you can stick it in your pocket. And I have this 85. The 85 is really cool, but I don't really use it too much on the video shoots. It's more or less for photography whenever I go take pictures of weddings and what have you. So here it is. Here's a lineup of all of my gear, starting with this. This is a Canon R6 mirrorless camera. It's got a Sigma. I'm a firm believer in third-party lenses because some of the lenses that they have out nowadays are really expensive. And you could pick these up on the used market because everybody wants the latest and greatest thing for almost nothing. It's an art lens. I'm a huge fan of the art lens line. They just give a different look than a lot of your other lenses. But it's a 24-70 2.8. This one up here is also a Sigma art lens. It's an 18-35 1.8, but it doesn't have image stabilization. This lens has image stabilization, plus the body has built-in in-body image stabilization, but it's still really shaky for what it is. Like a lot of the gauge, I do all of the cinematic shots with this camera, all of the gauge shots. If you see any detail shots of like engines and stuff like that, 9 times out of 10 it's with this camera. The colors aren't exactly 100% correct like they are with the GoPro, and that's why I find myself using the GoPro more than this camera, because you got to do a whole lot more in post with this camera to get the colors to where they're supposed to be. This is my GoPro. It's a Hero 9. I bought this brand new when I started the channel. I'm thinking about upgrading it because this one's crashed on me a couple times, and it's not... The GoPro system's a great system. Problem is it's not reliable. And anybody that uses them can tell you that they're finicky and they don't work a lot of times, and they're very finicky. This is my card reader, and I got this card reader so I could plug it into my iPad. I do everything from the iPad. All the research, everything. And all of the recording and stuff, and we'll get into that here real soon. So, let's begin here. Oh, this memory card is associated with the GoPro. I have 2 different cards associated with the GoPro. I used to try to put everything on one card, but I found out that if you start doing that and then you start going multiple places, it crashes. And then you lose everything. So, put it on multiple cards, I suppose. And then I guess if one card goes bad, then you still have stuff on other cards, if that makes any sense. But the problem is these cards are really small, really tiny, and you lose them very easily. So, go into the files folder. We're going to do the 67 Cadillac Coupe Deville for the episode later on today. So you just scroll down through here and you find the Cadillac, which it should be the very first one, but you know, with all this junk mail up here, it's hard to see. So it is the first one, so you hit select, And then you select all of these that you would want in the video. So that's all of them until you can see the next car, which the next car is a 1936 Ford. I was thinking about doing that episode today, honestly, but 36 is too close to 37, I guess. And I thought maybe a Cadillac was too close to Packard, but we're going to go with it. I try to space things out. I use InShot is the software program that I use. This is from yesterday. I took this Packard. So let me show you how I come up with the thumbnails. A lot of times I just take images from advertising. This image came from this. So that's how the image was. It was an advertisement piece, and then I just cut this out and just layered. It's funny how it all happens, but yeah, so I just took this right from the advertisement piece and then just got rid of all of this and then made it a little bit bigger and then put my own text on it. So it started off like this, and you can tell the colors are different, so I had to change that. This is the second rendition where I got rid of most of the colors and brought it all in, and this is the third one where I just put the text on it, what it's like, added those 3 lines to try to give it more. I think those 3 lines draw your attention to the car. I really like how this thumbnail came out. But here's some advertisement pieces that I didn't use. I thought that one was a bit risky. But this is cool with the 3 Stooges down there. I think I'm going to do that more often. I'm going to find advertisement pieces from that year and tie it in with the end. I think that's a really cool idea because there's so much that goes on during that year that you don't even really remember. Like A Day at the Races, that was 1937. Last Train from Madrid, 1937. They talk about the Spanish Civil War. It's just really cool. Different. Back in InShot, we're going to go back. We're going to hit draft that, I guess. We're going to go into video, and then it pulls up all of my videos that I have on my iPad, which I got to delete some of this so it doesn't get too confusing. And this is where it gets tricky sometimes, is to try to figure out what video goes where, because it's like putting it together. It's like putting together a 3-dimensional puzzle, really. So I believe this one should be the first one. So let's see what this... Let's talk styling. Just look at everything that is going on with this design. First off, the lights are stacked. So you'll watch this through, you'll get all of... There's a bunch of times where I misspeak and say things that shouldn't be in there. You edit it all out, and then notice it ends because you have to think of another direction, something else to talk about. So just make a cut there or whatever. So then you got to figure out what comes next. So you go back to the pile, and I think this one's next. And sometimes it's okay if you're wrong. You could always go back and you could always put stuff in different areas. Because right now we have 2 different slides or 2 different segments. You could cut these segments apart and add wherever you would want to add. Just to show you what this would look like. Before getting inside, look at how this door handle is designed. There's a lot of heft to this door. Super heavy door. So I found this clip, which needs to go in front of the other clips. So if I hold my finger down here, it's going to show me all of the different clips that I had. I made a splice and fixed that one part that I didn't want you guys to see. And then I'm going to move this up here so that when you see the end, so it goes from the tail section back to that. Windshield wipers are exposed. Has a cowl in the front. Okay, so I'm doing the body of the research right now. I use 4 sites religiously, and I'm finding out that all 4 sites have been wrong in the past. I will use Wikipedia, which they're not 100% accurate all the time. I also like to use Concept Cars because it's all laid out very easily, very easy to read on Concept Cars, but they've been wrong in the past. I also use Haggerty and Hemmings Motorway for some article stuff, but they've been wrong too in the past. A lot of times Hemmings will have a picture of a car like a 1957 Cadillac, and it won't be a 57 Cadillac, it would be a 58 Cadillac, and that happens a lot. The advertisements are honestly the best place to get the material because who knows their product better than the company selling it? So a lot of that stuff, like the specs for how long, wide, tall, wheelbase, it all comes from the advertisements themselves. Because for whatever reason, these companies didn't get that information from those, because if they contradict from what the advertisements say, they got it from somebody else. But sometimes that information isn't available in the advertisements. It depends on what era the car that's featured is from and what company it's from. Like a lot of 30s, a lot of 20s, 30s cars don't have all of the specifications because they wasn't really keeping track of that back then. Okay, so we got the majority of everything put in place to where it needs to be. So we're going to add a blank to the front of this. And we're going to draw it out about 7 or 8 minutes, something like that. That's generally how long the intro is before we get to the actual tour. Talk about the specs, talk about the different models, talk about just a bunch of stuff in the very beginning. So once that's at around 7 minutes, then we have the majority here, the bulk of it. And then at the end, we're going to add another blank to talk about the pros and cons and would you rather, name that tune, and the outro and all of that. And that's only generally about 2 or 3 minutes long, depending on what needs to be said. So we go back to the beginning, very beginning, and then I just read this into the iPad. Notice, I don't use a microphone. So everything that you hear is my voice that you hear. The GoPro does not have a microphone attached to it. When I use the Cinematic R6, I don't use a microphone. I don't use a microphone when doing this. I got a microphone for Christmas, but I don't have a clue how to get it to sync up to the iPad. I'm not very tech savvy, and that might come as a shock to a bunch of people. I try to do this cost-effective way as possible. I should probably maybe get a microphone. It might be easier to hear me, but we're already like 300. We're past 300 videos in, and I feel like this has worked so far, so why change it? Okay, this is going to be really weird having a camera filming me doing this because I've never done that before. But anyway, this is how it's done. Right here at the kitchen table with the iPad and my script. I don't read word for word what is on the script. This is more or less an outline to just keep my place. But this is how it's done. BBC first local radio station. Vietnam War protest. Expo 67 World's Fair in Canada draws 50 million visitors in 6 months. The year is 1967. So I hope you enjoyed that behind the scenes episode, but I did want to clear up a couple things before we go. So somebody asked me in the comments, probably, I think it was like last week, that I suck at reading from the slides. I wanted to be real with you and I wanted to be honest and tell you that the script isn't the same as what's written on the slides. I write the script way before I make the slides. Sometimes I find information isn't 100% correct. So you'll hear me say one thing, but I'll actually say something different. That's because it's contradicting. And it's kind of like CYA, cover your ass kind of thing. Every single source is different. Some people round numbers differently, and especially with the bore and stroke sizes, like people get really upset about two things: numbers and pronunciations. There's way more to life than numbers and pronunciations. Everybody's going to say something differently. Everybody's going to round differently. I was taught to round to the nearest whole number, but I'm finding out that that's not always the case. Sometimes people will round down when they're supposed to round up, and there's some sources that it's just funny, and it makes this job a whole lot harder. So I wanted to give you some of my would you rathers. Would you rather have cable clutch or hydraulic? I would definitely prefer cable clutch. Why? Because you could feel every single thing that is going on. They're very easy to, cable clutches do break, or rod style, they do break, but you don't have to put a new slave cylinder on it. You don't have to go through all of the headaches that you have to go through with a hydraulic clutch, and there's more feel. You are part of the driving experience with a cable clutch, and that's why I like cable over hydraulic. Paper or plastic, it really depends on the situation. Steak or chicken, once again, it depends on the situation. Sometimes I really like a good steak, but then there's other times that chicken will do. So it all just depends on what mood you're in. Also, where I'm from, we have things called chicken and steak salads. I know it's like a regional thing. A lot of people don't. I went to Baltimore one time and I said, hey, do you guys have like a steak salad? And they looked at me weird, like, why would you waste a good steak on a salad? And I was like, what are you talking about? It's the best thing in the world. You put some French fries on there, you lose them at French fries. It's just some weird food we eat here in Pennsylvania. Power steering or manual steering? It really depends on the car. But honestly, I would rather have manual steering because it's one less thing to go wrong. Power brakes or manual brakes? I would rather have power brakes. Manual brakes, they suck. You have to pump them up to stop. But, and this is where a lot of misinformation comes from. People think that if you have a single master cylinder and your brakes go out, you're screwed. That's the furthest thing from the truth. Yes, you will lose all your brakes, but 9 times out of 10, those vehicles had a backup braking system. That's why I call it the emergency brake and not the parking brake, because those become your emergency brakes once you lose your brakes. So on the truck, for example, it's got hydro brakes on all 4 wheels, drum operated. It did have a hydrovac, but we took the hydrovac out of the system because it was leaking and it was drawing it back into the engine and burning it off. So we just cut that out of the equation. I've driven, and I've said this story a couple times. I've driven my truck 16 miles to my mechanic's place with absolutely no brakes. The emergency brake line wasn't hooked up either, and I live in a hilly area, which 16 miles and then eventually driving through the city with no brakes, that was pretty scary. I was that guy. I wasn't going any faster than 35 because that's all I felt comfortable with. And as long as you use common sense, you should be able to get through. But a lot of times when driving, it's not about you, it's about the other guy. So you're always watching the other guy, because if he cuts you off and then dead stops in front of you, which I've had happen a lot in that truck. I mean, more times than I'd ever want to admit. But anyway, I drove it to my mechanic's place, 16 miles away, absolutely no brakes, no emergency brake. And a lot of people say, hey, Jay, how did you do that? Well, you use the transmission to stop. I've owned that truck for 3 years, and it does not have self-adjusting brakes. And I was able... I still haven't adjusted the brakes. I don't use the brakes. I use the transmission to stop or slow down. I use the transmission to slow down. And then if I have to stop, I just put my foot on the brake to stop. If the brakes go out, it's not the end of the world. The worst thing you can do is panic. You just use the transmission to slow down. If you have to stop, Put it in first gear, shut it off, and it will stop. You don't want to do that going faster than 5 miles an hour. You could do some serious damage to the drivetrain. But if you're going 5 miles an hour or less, it should be fine, especially if it's just an emergency. And you always want to keep everybody else in mind. You don't ever want to get anybody hurt, never hurt anybody. Vehicles are replaceable, people aren't. Thank you all so much for coming out and watching this. Be sure to check out the 67 Cadillac Coupe Deville episode. That's coming later today. And until next time, or until later today, toodaloo! Like you'll have car enthusiasts say, I want an analog driving experience, but they've never driven an analog car. People don't know what analog really is. Analog is power nothing. No power brakes, no power steering, manual transmission. Some people would even say double clutching would be a driver-focused car because you're not utilizing synchros to make the shift for you. A lot of people don't understand that. Like some car enthusiasts can't even drive a stick shift car that you have to double clutch.